Thanks for joining us for another edition of Ram Country. I'm your host, Dave Willauer, and I'm always excited about bringing you some of the great things that are happening across the Spring-Ford Area School District. Today is part 3 of a series that we've been doing on animation art with first grade teacher Vince Randall. Over the years, Vince has developed a passion for all things Disney and possesses a great admiration for animation and animation art. Vince, welcome back to Ram Country.
Thank you, Dave. It's great to be back.
Well, it's a pleasure to continue our conversation.
It is.
Now, since we had taped the last episode, there have been a couple of current events, really, that have happened in the Disney world. Mm-hmm. The first one was the passing of Ron Miller.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
You want to tell us who he was?
Yeah, Ron Miller was Walt Disney's son-in-law. He married Walt Disney's daughter, Diane. He was a big football player at the time in the 50s, but Walt Disney convinced him to get out of football and actually start working for the Disney company, which he was a bigwig, as you would say, into the 70s and the 80s, led major projects like The Fox and the Hound, and various live action films in the early 80s. So yeah, that was a real blow.
Yeah,
Disney historians were talking about it recently all over Facebook.
He continued to be involved with the company up until his death, right?
Absolutely, and his late wife, Diane, passed away a few years back. They led up the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. He was there quite often. Visitors would see him. So yeah, it was a real loss for the Disney community.
Have you been to that museum?
I have,
yeah,
yes.
And you highly recommend it?
I highly recommend it. I've been there twice, and 2 hours is not enough.
Wow.
You need a full day to really immerse yourself.
All right. Well, we'll have to talk to Andrew. That could be a road trip for us. We'll
Absolutely. Yeah. Sounds good.
Right, okay.
Sounds good.
And then we also heard about the passing of another Disney employee, Dave Smith.
Yeah, Dave Smith, he was the founder pretty much of the Walt Disney Archives. They brought him in 1970 to collect all the materials from Walt Disney's desk and office and to inventory that and categorize all that.
Which he died in 67?
Disney died in 66.
66?
Yeah.
So for those 4 years, it just sat there?
The office was left untouched. So when he came in 1970, Dave Smith found it the way it was.
So I'm sure his archival information and the records that he kept was instrumental in that Saving Mr. Banks, the movie.
Absolutely.
Because they recreated Walt's office,
Absolutely, right? Yes. And they recreated it in real life too. There's certain tours that I don't know if it's VIPs, you can go on to see that, but Smith basically took things that were artwork that was in basement, exposed to water damage and things like that. And from 1970 on, he led the team and plowed the way, and all that stuff is in temperature-controlled rooms.
All protected and preserved.
Yep, thanks to him. So once again, a big loss for the Disney community.
And he was the guy that you went to if you had a question, right?
Yeah, I never asked Dave Smith specifically a question, but historians did. But I had a connection with Smith in another way.
What was that?
I taught a Cool School summer course here in the Spring-Ford School District. A few years back, it was a Disney course, and when I found out Smith was retiring in 2010, I thought it would be great for the little kids to send him retirement cards. So I sent them out. I went out to California to Disneyland, came back, and I got a letter in the mail from Smith saying thank you. And I think we could probably include an image of that right about here.
Okay.
It was just him saying thank you for the wonderful retirement cards from the kids. We'll always treasure them, and he signed his name. And
oh, that's so great.
So really cool. That was my only time I connected with him.
Okay. Well, that's neat that you got that connection.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. Well, let's continue our story about Ron Diaz. For those folks who haven't seen the first 2 segments that we've talked about him, just give us a little brief synopsis of who Ron was.
Ron was an animation artist. He did some animating on Sleeping Beauty starting in 1955. That was his big project. And from there, he worked on to being a background painter. From there, it took him from Hanna-Barbera, UPA, Warner Brothers, a slew of studios throughout his lifetime. So when you asked Ron what he wanted to be known for, it was an animation artist and an illustrator of children's books.
Okay. And his career spanned how many years?
Wow, 1955 until his passing in 2013.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. and very versatile.
Very versatile.
Yeah.
Yes. He could copy almost any style.
Is that right?
Yeah. If you look at background art in Sleeping Beauty, that designer was named Ivan Earl, who was a big hero to Ron. And I mean, Ron, up until his mid-70s, could recreate Earl's background paintings. And if you look at that movie, Earl's styling was very distinct and unique. Ron could do it.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ron's work at Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah.
And that would have been approximately when?
1964 up until about 1970, off and on until the 80s. Once again, when we talked about the last time, he did background art for the Flintstones, Johnny Quest, Scooby-Doo, Magilla
Bear.
Gorilla, yeah, yes. Yogi Bear. He also did artwork for various Hanna-Barbera records, which are very desirable now. So yeah, he was, and Hanna-Barbera was a happy time for Ron, happier than Disney, believe it or not.
Okay.
He was there and it just felt like a huge community, and he worked on many Saturday morning cartoons.
All right. And I think I remember a lot of those that I was watching when I was a kid. So
Yeah.
now he got an award for some of the work that he was doing from, it was an internal type
Yeah,
award,
in
right?
the late 60s, Hanna-Barbera, through the famous actor and dancer Gene Kelly had this idea to do a production of Jack and the Beanstalk, combining animation with live action.
Okay.
Gene Kelly stars in it, so when you watch it, Gene Kelly's dancing, Ron's backgrounds are behind him, animated characters are interacting with Kelly, so it was like a lower budget Mary Poppins. It's not very well known, but Ron received an award from Bill Hanna of Hanna-Barbera for his outstanding work on background paintings. And there's a picture of that too with Bill Hanna handing Ron what I believe is an extra bonus check for a well-done job.
Wow. It's really kind of neat to see the different ways that Ron was involved in these collaborations, you know, the different ways in which he connected with the different disciplines. I mean, there you have him working with Gene Kelly, so
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, very versatile, very versatile.
Now, you have a story about artist Dave High.
Yes, I interviewed Dave High last year. He also background painter, but mostly a layout artist. And a layout artist makes the sketch of the background, then hands it to the background painter to paint it in. He was mostly that layout guy, kind of like a blueprint. He wanted to get into Hanna-Barbera in the worst way in the late 60s, and he worked the graveyard shift. So during the night, his job was Xeroxing animated drawings onto clear celluloid. It was a pretty tedious job, but he worked all night, and he would wait until 7:30 the next morning for Ron Diaz to come in. And Ron would teach Dave High how to do background painting and certain techniques. And Dave High said Ron was just a wonderful guy to look over his shoulder and so giving of his time.
Wow, a generous guy.
Very generous guy. And Dave High, he did his graveyard shift. Dave High would actually sneak down into the background department at night and use their paints.
Oh, is that
doodle
right?
around like on his lunch break in the middle of the night. But Ron was always there the next morning to give him some tips, and Dave High made it into the business. He made it as a background painter and a layout artist.
And you were able to interview him.
Yeah, wonderful guy, wonderful guy. I hope to interview him some more, actually.
Okay, very good. Now, we also want to talk about some of the work that Ron did with one of my favorite characters, Mr. Magoo.
Yes, yep.
Well, why don't we just hold that? We'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about Uncle Sam Magoo. All right? Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to Ram Country. We're talking to first grade teacher Vince Randall about the association that he's had with background artist Ron Diaz. And just before the break, we were talking about a project that Ron worked on, Uncle Sam Magoo.
Yeah.
And now, what studio was he with? When
That was UPA.
Okay.
Yep, UPA. They were the creators of Mr. Magoo, and I don't know if some of your younger audiences out there even know who Mr. Magoo is, but he was a very funny old,
Nearsighted.
nearsighted, old little guy that was a cartoon, and I don't know if we want to do a little riff. How did he sound, Dave? Like,
Oh, he had a bit of an accent.
exactly.
Oh, and he would laugh. You
Yeah,
know, right?
yeah.
Jim Backus did the voice.
Oh,
if you-
okay.
you know,
All right,
Jim
I didn't
Backus.
know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Ron almost got the voice job too on that particular project.
Oh, is
Ron
that right?
Diaz, yeah.
Oh.
He did a great Mr. Magoo impression. He would do it to me on the telephone. I would call Ron and he'd answer as Magoo. And they must have heard him at UPA do this. And he actually, they recorded some sound bits of him and everything. And I don't know why they were using him at the time, if something was going on with Jim Backus, but it never worked out for Ron, but he
Okay.
loved telling that story,
Yeah.
and he loved that project. He loved doing background art on that.
Okay.
And from what I understand, it's a nice little film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched a clip of it on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like it gets into different things about American history, all that kind of thing. So
Yep.
can
Yep.
check that out
Yeah, definitely will.
from a nearsighted perspective.
From a
that-
yes.
that of Mr. Magoo. Yeah. Now Ron also worked on another project that never came to fruition, but he was quite excited about it, right?
He was.
The Enchanted Frog.
Yes, The Enchanted Frog was actually a personal Ron Diaz project. Ron, I'm unsure of how far the project got, but he had this vision about a story about a frog that was enchanted and magic was involved. And I know he did preliminary work on it, drawings, concept art. When I talked to Ron's son, he believed some of that was actually ink and painted onto clear celluloid, so it got pretty far. When he sent the work into the studio that was doing the work for him, the artwork was actually lost for a period of time, which very much upset Ron. But when the studio closed down and everything, Ron managed to get all that artwork back. So that's in Ron Diaz's archives as we speak, in his Californian home right now. But I know I got a good treat for you right now. You and I are both fans of a certain comedian
Yes.
named Jonathan Winters,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, yeah.
Hysterical guy. Winters was known for his multiple personalities,
the
right?
characters, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
he could do amazing different dialects and languages. Ron Diaz really wanted Winters to do the voices in this Enchanted Frog film. It never worked out. The film was never made. But from what I understand, who he was working with wasn't so hot about using Winters, but actually wanted to use a comedian of the time named Flip Wilson.
Okay.
And from what I understand, there was some talks going with Flip Wilson, but the project just never made it. But
Okay,
it
for
was,
one reason or another. And this whole conversation, it really makes you wonder, what are the other types of projects that never have seen the light of day?
it does
you
make
know,
you wonder.
Different work has been done on them and so on,
Yeah.
and then they just never come to fruition for one reason or another.
Right, and Ron in particular, I mean, I know with the biography that I'm working on him now, that I know we'll talk about later, I know even after that's done, there's going to be still things about Ron that I never knew, that I uncover almost on a weekend basis when I sit down and work on this thing. It's amazing how much he had his hands on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that in a previous episode, you really talked about that, how you would be mentioning, I was looking at this the other day, and he would say, well, I worked on that, or I had a hand in that.
Yeah, and that's not just unique to him. Several artists I've talked to can say the exact same thing. They oftentimes were not dedicated to one studio. They did freelance work for a bunch of people and moved wherever the work was.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're really creative, I really think that shows too. You can delineate into different areas and use that creativity within different applications. as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about one of the things, one of the projects that he worked on that did come to fruition and was a big project for him, and that's The Secret of Nim.
Yes, a Don Bluth production. Ron always spoke so highly of that film. And The Secret of Nim came out in 1980, 1981. It was an animated adaptation of Robert C. O'Brien's Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim.
I used to read that to my class.
Yeah, and one of my favorite stories. So they developed it into a film, and Ron was brought on as a background painter, and he just loved working on this film. His favorite project.
Can you tell us a little bit about the style of the background art for this?
Well, with Ron, it was rather unique. Oftentimes in background art, they would use watercolors, but Ron preferred something called vinyl acrylics, which background artists use. And Don Bluth at first was kind of like, I'm not sure if I'm really sold on this. Ron went away for about 2 or 3 weeks, created some samples and brought it to Bluth, and Bluth was like, wow, your vinyl acrylics look just like watercolor. So Ron worked on various segments of the film. The beginning, if people have seen the film or ever see the film, the first 10, 15 minutes of the film is mostly Ron Diaz background art. When the cat, the farm cat, is chasing Mrs. Brisby in this film, and there's a whole story behind that too.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Licensing?
Licensing, because of Wham-O creating the Frisbee that we use. Even though it was already, if Frisbee was her name in the book, they said nope, so they had to bring Dom DeLuise and all them back to re-record any lines that used the name Frisbee. One actor passed away, so a very talented editor, sound editor, would cut off just the beginning of when he said Frisbee and manipulate it in a way where this actor sound Brisbee. And that actor was, I think, John Carradine. He did the voice of the great owl in the woods.
He always played creepy characters.
Very deep baritone voice,
right. Okay.
Yep. So Ron loved telling that story. Ron did voices in that too.
Oh, did he
of
really?
Various rats.
Is that right?
You see, yep.
It's unbelievable.
Yep.
Now, I just kind of remember, I remember watching this. It's been a number of years, but I remember it as being very dark.
Yes, it was a dark film. There's some sequences there that I think would scare children to today. But and the book in itself was dark. But Ron liked the lighter stuff. He liked the sunsets, the vermilion skies, the beautiful soft colors. Where another artist named Don Moore, who worked on the film, he liked the darker, grungier stuff, the rats inside of the thorn bush and all that. So they got to choose, which was great. That was usually you were assigned. Don Bluth says, hey, what do you like? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
And Ron did the lighter stuff.
Okay, can you tell us about some of the sequences that he did?
Yeah, the cat chase he did, which uses a lot of beautiful colors with bright greens, and Ron also did the interior of the Brisby house in the film, which was a cinder block in the middle of a farmer's field.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of the gem colors, the greens, the purples, the little mouse Timmy sick in his bed, his quilt. That was all done by Ron. He also did sequences inside of the water mill where Jeremy the Crow and Mrs. Brisby are talking about getting medicine for her son Timmy. Ron, those greens in there just scream Ron Diaz's style. Interiors of Farmer Fitzgibbon's kitchen. When you looked at the purple kind of gem-colored tiled floors, that was all Ron. So yeah, those are the sequences he worked on.
Very cool.
And the one sequence he worked on, I think it was called sequence. I can't remember the sequence number, but it's the scene in the film that's the most thrilling, where the farmer fires up his tractor for springtime and starts moving that tractor across the field.
Oh, yes, and they're going to dig up the cinder block.
Yes,
which is their home.
Yes, the little mouse Timmy is sick inside of the cinder block. They can't move him. So Ron worked on that whole sequence, which he said accounted for 131 pieces of background art alone.
For that sequence?
For that sequence.
Unbelievable.
Yep, and the only advice Don Bluth gave him was, since it was a very suspenseful scene, Ron initially started it off with a red sky in the background to be menacing, but Don Bluth said, well, let's build to that. Start with a gray sky, bleak of color, emotionless, and then as the action's building up, build up to that red vermilion sky. And Ron thought, wow, man, what a great piece of advice. So when you see that sky, that was all Ron Diaz's background art.
Knowing these little tidbits of information, it really makes you want to go back and watch these again.
Yeah.
And take that into consideration.
I highly recommend, and when your grandchildren get older, Dave, show them the film. It's a wonderful, thrilling little piece.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yep.
Wow, very cool. All right, so we want to also talk about, anything else about the Secrets in NIMH?
Other than him doing various voices, it was just, anyone you talk to about The Secret of NIMH, and I've talked to several artists, said it felt like a family. And you didn't often get that in the major studios.
Yes.
Don Bluth broke away from Disney to start this on his own. So
So he had a different perspective.
he had a different, Disney was going through a stage in the 70s where they were recycling old animated art, and
Yes.
they didn't feel like they were moving forward with their art
Right,
necessarily.
right.
Don Bluth took a group of artists, broke off of that, and The Secret of NIMH was his first big project.
And just the fact that he gave the artists choices on
Yeah.
what they wanted to work
Yeah,
on was a departure.
Right, absolutely.
All right, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Ron's work on some golden books that may be familiar to some of our viewers. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back. You're watching Ram Country on RCTV. And we're talking to Vince Randall, a first grade teacher at Limerick Elementary School, who had a relationship with Ron Diaz. Had a chance to meet him and interview him over the years before his death, and we're talking to him about some of those experiences. Right before the break, we were talking about a little bit about Ron's work on the Golden Books. Very popular series of books. and,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think they're Golden Books in everybody's home who has kids.
And I assure you, there's a Ron Diaz book in every home without people even knowing it.
He worked on that many.
He worked on that many. He was brought on in the 1980s to do newer adaptations, newer fresh looks at various film adaptations of Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, Bambi, Ron's personal favorite Disney film.
And he recreated the artwork in those Golden Books
Yeah.
so that it matched the film, right?
Yeah, and his approach was he would do the background paintings, but instead of painting the characters right on the backgrounds, he painted them on cells like they would in the films. Lay it over the backgrounds, and then that's where they photographed those. And at the time, Whitman Publishing, the Little Golden Books were out of Racine, Wisconsin, and he got to visit that factory where they make the. I actually just talked to a gentleman who's probably the Little Golden expert, Steve Santee, and he was a good friend of Ron's, and so they learned a lot together through that. But yeah, Ron worked on a handful of books. So I challenge you, audience, go open up those books and not only look for Ron's name, but look for his initials hidden
Those
in
little
some of the illustrations.
Easter eggs.
The little
right,
Easter eggs
that are
on the
hidden.
front covers. You'll find an RD. You'll find an RD.
RD?
Yep.
Look for those RDs.
Yep, they're in there.
Very
Yep.
cool. Very cool. So talk to us a little bit about Ron's work in the 90s. He was doing some work for Disney at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah, he in the late 80s worked on Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the Toontown sequence. And then he got into a lot of Disney marketing stuff, magazine covers. He also did some lithographs whenever a new movie would come out, or if a new movie would come out, or if they would bring a classic from the vault, you would buy it on VHS, if you remember the jewel boxes, the big white
Yes, right,
boxes. A lot of time there was promotional art that would come with that, as you know, buying those films, and Ron did that promotional art for many of those.
How about that?
A lot of specialty stuff for high-end collectors, some artwork that cost thousands of dollars at the time Ron worked on. So he was kind of, he worked on the Little Mermaid TV series that came out like in 91, 92. And then, just when you think Ron Diaz couldn't do everything, he had met his quota, he actually worked on computer software then too, artwork for that.
So that was using digital artwork, right? Or not necessarily?
Well, he did his classic way of doing things. He would do his background art, but in the 90s, there were a lot of computer Disney software games you could buy. Like there was one on 101 Dalmatians with Cruella de Vil, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Ron's background art was in there.
Wow.
But I talked to an artist who worked for that company called Creative Capers. And Ron was very kind of like, I don't know about this technology stuff. I'll do my background art. But they said, Ron, take this tablet and this pen and do some digital art. I'm going to step away for about a half hour. She came back and he had a whole piece of art right
really?
there, you know,
Yeah.
using computer software. So he was very open to things. But at heart, he was a traditional guy.
Yeah, yeah. He loved that brush on paper.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. He really left his mark, didn't he?
He did, and they loved him there too. And then into the 2000s, he really took some time for himself to work on fine art. So he lived in the Big Sur area at the time, and he had a beautiful little cabin-like home off Highway 1, is it? Is that the one highway that runs along the Pacific Coast
I
there?
believe
Yep.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, he was 20 miles from any major town, and it was down near the Bixby Bridge, one of the big bridges that you can see, that you can cross there on Highway 1. But anyway, he did some fine art painting there too. And he loved the fine art work, but when people wanted to buy Ron Diaz stuff, they didn't really want his fine art stuff. He was a Disney guy. We wanted the Disney work.
Now, when he did fine art, what were the subjects?
The beach there right at Big Sur. I know he did some paintings in Carmel, California. He was very much into Greek mythology too, so he would do like his interpretations of mythological characters, fairies, mermaids, things like that. It was kind of a breakaway from the Disney stuff, and he exhibited that stuff too.
But yet a whimsical nature.
Whimsical, very whimsical. I know they had a Tinkerbell computer animated series that came out. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but Ron did conceptual work for that too, saying, hey, the fairies' homes could look like this. So Disney still tapped into Ron's art up close to his passing in 2013. But like I said, the fine art stuff didn't hit off. So what he ended up doing was combining his Disney characters into his fine art paintings that he had already done.
Yeah.
That stuff sold.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he would have a fine art background,
right,
with the different Disney characters in there.
Yeah, injected into them. So, and I think that's unique of many artists. When they reach the end of retirement, they take the time to do projects they never really worked on and to exhibit their work. And then Ron made time for any family, friends, and fans. On his website, he put his home telephone number.
Is that right?
You could call him, and he was always so open to his fans. And,
just like that? You
just
could just dial the number and call?
I was nervous to do that. I wrote him a letter the proper way, but when we finally, he said, you should have called me. It was right on the website. So that's how giving he was to his fans.
Now, did he mostly use acrylics?
Yeah, vinyl acrylics. Yeah, he liked oils, but he was allergic to oil paints.
That's right. I remember you mentioning that. Okay.
So he could
had to use the
manipulate
acrylics.
vinyl acrylics like no one's business, and his color sense and his soft approach, his edging on his paintings and his later work is very soft, not sharp, very soft. And if you are able to get one of the Blu-ray editions of Sleeping Beauty, when the menu starts up on the Blu-ray and you go to click play, when it's Sleeping Beauty's castle there in various seasons, that's all Ron Diaz's art too.
That's
fall,
great.
winter, summer, and spring. When every time you booted up the Blu-ray, it was a different background there as a little treat. So.
All right, tell us about your meeting him. The circumstances of that and the actual meeting.
Yeah, I was interested in an artist named Dick Kelsey. I typed in Dick Kelsey on Google, and it led me to Ron Diaz. Ron Diaz thought of Kelsey as a mentor back in the 60s.
Well, he was permitted to stand behind Dick's shoulder and watch him work. Right?
Yeah. And so Ron always thought of him as a mentor back in those early Hanna-Barbera days in the early 60s. So he was always grateful for learning from Kelsey and learned some great techniques. Like Kelsey oftentimes would use a toothbrush just to speckle paint, and the way he used a paintbrush as a pencil, as Ron would say. So Ron helped me with my research on Kelsey. A piece on Kelsey that I wrote got published, but I wanted to learn more about Ron. So Ron and I almost talked on a weekly basis from January 2011 to his passing in July 2013. We had a 2.5-year friendship that felt like a lifetime.
Wow. And a lot of those were for the purpose of interviewing him for a biography.
For a biography. As I got to know Ron, got to meet him in August 2012, my wife and I, Ron and I, when we made that connection and he hugged me, and he must have held on to me for 2 minutes. So keep in mind, this was 2 years of phone calls.
Yes.
And that fall, I said, Ron, how would you feel about me writing something? He said, I would love that. So he permitted me in the fall of 2012 to interview him almost every Saturday for 8 weeks. And each interview ranged anywhere from an hour to 2 hours.
And you tape recorded those.
And I recorded them. Yeah, it's like 10 to 12 hours of audio. And listening to them, Dave, is like talking to Ron all over again on the telephone.
Cool.
It's just so moving.
Yeah.
You know, he was such a special guy.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
permit me, a school teacher from Pennsylvania, to let him enter his world,
Right,
you know?
right.
So I'm in the midst of writing that biography now, and it's such a gift. I teach during the week, and I commit myself every Saturday is writing day.
Okay.
And sometimes I only get about 1,000 words done, you know, but I listen to Ron, and he's telling the story, you know, he's leading me on the way. So I listen to it, and I write.
Yeah.
I could have transcribed all those interviews and just read them, but it's so much more enjoyable as I listen to him as I'm writing.
Yeah. Because you lose the pauses, you use the inflection and all
Right.
that kind of thing. The enthusiasm,
Yes,
I'm sure that
and he
you pick
was
up
a
on.
character, let me tell you. He would break out into a song in the middle of interviews, and you know, he was just a special guy, and I'm glad I was smart enough at the time to interview him in chronological order. So from the time he
Yes.
was born
Yes, yeah,
until that time
Sure,
in 2012, and it has aided me immensely.
very good.
Yeah.
Well, this is the end of our interviews. This is our third and final interview talking about Ron Diaz and your involvement with him, the relationship that you developed with him. But it's not the end of the story, because you know you're going to be writing this book and publishing it. I mean, you've set a deadline.
Yeah,
But
the end of this year I want it done, and I fingers crossed, audience, that it gets published.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we wish you the best, and perhaps in the future we can have you on again to share your book.
Oh, that would be
That
wonderful.
Would be great.
That would be wonderful.
Right, very good. Vince, thank you very much for allowing
Thank
us
you,
to interview you. And I wore a special tie today.
I love it.
You're
Got the old
interested-
school Mickey and the
Yes,
pie eyes.
they're all
and
in there.
My favorite.
And just to show you my appreciation, there you go. This tie is for you.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Yeah,
It was
sorry,
a pleasure.
It's a used gift, but you know.
Hey, anything from you I welcome. And at the end of this, I want to say, this is for you, Ron.
Oh, appreciate that. Very good.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching. This is Ram Country on RCTV, and Dave Willauer saying, make it a great day or not, the choice is yours.